I am really excited to introduce Kathy Pham. She is a fellow and adjunct lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and she's also simultaneously the vice president of AI at Workday. It is unclear how you do both of those jobs at once, but she does it. And actually, it's not so surprising that she multitasks two very challenging full-time gigs, given the breadth and the depth of her background, which spans tech companies. So she started at Google as an engineer and a product manager, government. She was the executive director of the National AI Advisory Committee and the deputy chief technologist at the FTC, and also nonprofits, including Mozilla, where she co-founded and co-led the Responsible Computer Science Challenge. Among other things, her bio is very long. You can Google her. Not to mention, she is a mom of three fantastic humans. She's a truly caring person. We never focus enough on how people can be really good. And I know this because, and I'll let you decide whether or not to trust me, because I've been honored to have worked with Kathy at a number of these organizations, and also very grateful to be able to call her a friend. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kathy to talk a little bit about the history of AI and what we can learn from that history. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful. I've learned so much from Kasha and Newman and so many others here over the years, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. So my goal today is to plant seeds for how we all see ourselves in the moment we're in with AI, and I'll root that in by sharing a bit about our history, where we are right now in the present, where we might go in the future, because who knows, and how we can shape that, and all the ways that different parts of society have played a role in the technology. So is it, just the tech companies? Is it government to some extent? Is it nonprofits? Is it venture capital funding? Is it individual advocacy of folks? It's all of it. And it's something I've actually learned to explore quite extensively in collaborating with folks like Newman and Kasha, because I was a trained computer scientist, and in many ways, we didn't learn all of these ways of thinking about society more broadly. And we actually changed the name of the Responsible Computer Science Challenge at one point to the Responsible Computing Challenge, with the recognition that it takes multiple disciplines and many disciplines to think about and build technology to do computing. And it's never just computer science at the table alone. And it never has been just computer science at the table alone, but we sometimes talk about it that way, as if our technology systems are built by a bunch of only engineers with no other insights from anyone else. So with that, I will bring that back to this talk. And I'll also share that Kasha mentioned I have three kids, and something I think about often that informs what I'll share today, but just how I think about technology in general is each evening I'm reading, we do our bedtime routine, and I'm reading to my kids, and no matter how tired I am, I think to myself, do I ever want this outsourced to anyone else or anything else? Because technology can. Um, an important question I think to always ask is, regardless of what kind of technologies exist, how much agency do we also want to keep for ourselves? And what do you want to keep that is very uniquely human and uniquely to us? And maybe the people who build the technologies might build that friction in. Um, Likely they won't. So there's a lot of us figuring out as well how much agency we want to keep. All right, so I will jump in. I'll share a few slides, and then I was able to hang on for the last Q&A, so I'm really excited for the Q&A portion and to treat this like a conversation. And albeit a weird one-sided conversation, but a conversation nonetheless. All right, so how does AI affect us, the past, present, and future? I'll kick off by saying it's so embedded in all of our lives. And sometimes when I'll talk to my students or others, folks are like, oh man, how do we think about bringing this new AI thing into our organizations? And it's really important, and Arvin mentioned this, right, to root ourselves a bit into history, where if you just think today, the maps we use when we buy a house, the technology that's determining how we get loans, when we go to doctor, the technology that does everything from our scheduling to our cancer diagnoses, are powered by some kind of machine learning and AI. Just now, like self-driving cars, technology has been in existence for a long time. We're now seeing them on the road and pretty common, more so ways, in ways where people no longer like, oh my gosh, what is that? And self-driving cars are more common as well. If we've ever used search, email, they're embedded. I've worked on some of those systems in the past, right? How our search results are surfaced to us, how our emails might not have spam. We don't really think about that anymore because they're taken care of, probably due to some kind of machine learning. They've snuck into our lives a bit via voice assistants in our devices, whether you actually bought a device in your home, or you might just have a device that you use for, let's say, calling people, but now it also has a voice assistant and it just kind of stuck in there a little bit. Any kind of online shopping, there's technology that personalizes what we're looking for, what we want. And then, of course, very recently, the conversational AI tools across multiple platforms from the big companies like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and so many others who are reshaping how we interact with machines. And I raise this because we have tools for thinking about technology, right, as both a developer and a user. There are times when you might have access to a map, but then you're like, I don't know, I just want to wander around a city. Or there are times when you're like, I don't know if that credit score or that decision from my bank is right. Or there are times when you get fraud notifications and you're like, wow, that's really cool. They're pretty good. And they've gotten quite good. So like drawing on ways that we've had in the past to really understand how we want to move forward because we've developed those tools for how we interact with these machines. That's not to say that this moment is not different. It is, and I'll get into that in a bit because I'm going to talk about the past. So the early foundations and the early breakthroughs, and in this current moment, I thought about making the current moment 2023 to 2025, which is really the conversational AI ChatGPT moment. But actually, there's a lot that happened starting from 2017 that led to this moment, and I'll unpack that. And then the future, which I imagine we'll have a lot of conversations about. And the way I've broken this up is how I think about it, which is what was under the hood, what are all those nitty-gritty technology, engineering, AI, ML details? And then what does it mean for us on the consumer user side of it? But before I dive into that, I love this so much because I came across this quote maybe months, maybe a few years ago, where Ada Lovelace, who's considered one of the world's first programmers, she worked on really, really huge systems. She actually had this quote from 1842, which is over 183 years ago, and said, suppose, for example, that the fundamental relationships between sound in the art of harmony were susceptible of such expression and adaptations, the machine could compose musical pieces as long as and complex as you like. So really, she was the OG generative AI person, or at least thought about it. And actually, she went on to question and raise a lot of questions about, well, should machines do this even if they could? And I bring this up because I love, whenever I feel stuck, I love to draw on history to say, when have we come across a problem similar? Maybe not with exact technology details, maybe not like some GPT-4, or like technology, but maybe someone had the idea to compose new, in quotes, new musical pieces with technology that's complex. And people had to think of frameworks to deal with that. What can we do to learn from that? So given that, planting the seed of Ada Lovelace in your head, let's talk about the past. So lots of folks will think about or talk about this like invention of AI in the 1950s. And to some extent, because we like to have straight, narrow stories, it's true. There's a conference at Dartmouth that coined the term artificial intelligence. I also love to bring up that even the term artificial intelligence was quite debated in the early days. And I think it's important for now because even then folks are like, well, do you want a term that makes it seem like machine are just as good as human, but are artificial? And there are all these ideas that were thrown out. It's actually why machine learning was used for a long time. And you'll still find computer scientists that are like, that's not artificial intelligence. You have to call it machine learning, even though AI has now been pretty much adopted as the common way we describe things. But it started roughly in the 50s. Around the same time, like symbolic reasoning came out, so like beyond just data and text, like how do we think about symbols and patterns to make decisions? And this is back in like the 50s and 60s. Rule-based AI systems for chemistry and understanding bacterial infection existed. So like imprinting little marks in healthcare. expert systems were pretty narrow domains, right? Like, so thinking about like bacterial infections are quite narrow. And there was a huge wave of AI winters and optimism and failures. When you hear AI winters, it's moments where they're like, this technology is going to change everything. And then it didn't live up to its potential, or maybe it was super cool to see it be like play a game of chess or something, and then the practical applications were not quite there. This moment we're in now is different because we're seeing practical applications. But there were these moments of AI winters, and that's relevant because when there were winters, there were forces at play, whether there was government funding or companies investing that pulled the technology back in that really continue to advance the field of AI. So how does all this affect us, right? Up to the 80s, medical diagnoses started, chemical analyses. The early aughts of like automated decision making was a thing. Real world adoption was a little brittle because people couldn't figure out where it goes yet, but that's just the nature of research sometimes. So you fast forward into an era of neural networks, and it's funny because I started my own CS journey in the early 2000s, and people were like, neural networks are not going anywhere, ha ha ha, don't study that. And turns out neural networks eventually became the foundation for where we are with technology today. Um, but things like back propagation algorithms, multi-layer perceptions, support vector machines, foundation for modern deep learning, these are all pretty technical computer science terms, but they ended up in something that Dr. Fei-Fei Li produced called ImageNet, this idea that you can have all of this stuff, like this advancements in algorithms and new ideas for where you want to go with AI, but until you really have large, well-labeled data sets, you really can't do a whole lot. And so Dr. Fei-Fei Li and her team created ImageNet, which later became the foundation of a lot of modern machine learning and AI as well. But what that created space for was early spam email filtering, credit card fraud detection algorithms, optical character recognition. So that's when you see you can scan in an image, or you might have a PDF or something and it can pull out the text in it. And back between the 80s and 2000s, the early ideas for personalized recommendations. And I like to think about this because we think we're like, how do we get to the moment we're in today? Well, it's because all these seeds were planted since back in the day. In the 2010s, one of my favorite things to point out too is there was a rise of trust and safety teams. Before that, companies had corporate governance teams and things like that, but the concept of a trust and safety team really popped up inside technology companies in the 2010s. It also coincided with AlexNet's breakthrough with image recognition. It was a competition with ImageNet. There was a paper that is quite often cited in our CS world of attention is all you need. It was a play on a Beatles song that's like, love is all you need. But what's notable there is the start of the transformer architecture started. So what that means is when you hear ChatGPT, the GPT part stands for generative pre-trained transformer. Again, you don't have to remember that, but the T is transformer, and the technology for it has been around really since 2017, which isn't that long ago in the great history of things, but it wasn't like it popped up overnight. There have been a lot of people thinking about this. And the moment that ChatGPT came on the scene, it helped us all understand, oh, that's what GPT technology can do. I can put in some stuff in my own language, and then it can give me some stuff back that sounds like it's right. And it made it more common because somebody understood how to bring it to the masses. So the 2010s, how did all that affect us? The Transformer paper, all the AlexNet, ImageNet, et cetera. So smartphone camera improvements, photo recognitions, language translation quality improvements. It wasn't like it was perfect, but things like Google Translate had gotten a lot better. Voice assistants became a bigger part of our lives. And then social media content filtering and recommendations became more common. So again, you might have used these things and not known machine learning or AI was some part of this, but the research and technology behind it was what fueled all these things that in some ways just snuck into our lives, right? You probably didn't have it ask permission to like do social media filtering or some of the recommendations. And I'm gonna share a bit about what that looks like in a bit as well. So before I jump to the present, I'm gonna do a reading pause and share. I love this from Lisa, who shared their AI book club reading from years ago because it just coincided with my own reading, plus some that I had never seen before. And I actually added a couple as well. For us to unpack everything I just mentioned, things like technology being part of our lives, AI being used for everything from voice assistants to maps to helping us navigate different areas. There are countless books, including snake oil, AI snake oil that Arvin was just here for. But things like Dr. Joy Buolamwini's Unmasking AI and Dr. Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression and Automating Inequality and Design Justice and Equity Machine and things like that that really help us understand technology's impact on society. But there are also really great readings around the hardware that powers all of this, the hardware that we have to think about when we think about the effects on our environments and sustainability. There's also the tech culture. So there's a handful of books here about the culture that has fueled the building of the technology. And as you all know, the tech culture then sets the tone for like the technology that we then see as the end product. So that's our reading break. Here are a set of amazing books to help unpack the whole ecosystem of AI, from the hardware to the culture of the people who build it, to the ethics and responsibility that we have to think about when we build it. And some of these books were written well before a lot of the conversation around here are some of the issues we have to think about with AI, right? Dr. Sophia Noble was writing her book well before people were capturing the world's attention on world stages about the safety concerns of the algorithms that we face. So it's really important there's lots of resources is a big takeaway for me. There's a lot to unpack, but there's lots of people who've really thought and written about this to help us understand the moment we're in. So to wrap up the past, two big moments that also shaped where we are: the internet and mobile. The internet made room for connected systems where we can exchange data pretty quickly. There was an explosion of data because now you can collect data and share them across systems pretty quickly. And algorithms grew to understand personal behavior online. So the shopping and the search results, because people wanted to use them. And of course, these companies would figure out, well, how do we make our product something that you more likely will use? And then the mobile moment, it made it so that we can have AI in our pocket. Virtual assistant, the idea of virtual assistants were tested. They weren't great then. They're still not that great now, but they started, at that moment. So people now have a concept of what it is. And then new types of work and new ways of work were created. So everything from the gig economy to even just how we handle our workplaces today, because we can check our email and Slack at any point in time, right? New ways of work were created with the ability to just to pull these powerful machines out of our pockets. And that continued to lay the foundation for the explosion we see now in the present of where AI is. So back in 2017, I mentioned the paper about the transformer. It led to all these GPT developments. You don't have to remember what all these parameters mean, but what it means is it really just led to this moment, 2022, where ChatGPT launched. And after all these years of technology building momentum, this tool launched and was like, hey, public, this is what this is. You can use it. You can generate information. So widespread exposure to powerful language AI, early adoption in content creation and writing assistance, which a lot of people used it for. Academic research and applications blew up, lots of new research, and then the public awareness and interest about AI and capabilities grew. That also made it so every corporate, somebody asked this question, like every company all of a sudden was like, we have to figure out how to take this consumer technology and put it into enterprise. And suddenly this technology that was a kind of fun consumer thing was now making it ways into how we teach, how we learn, how we work, how companies make decisions. And they're all actively thinking about that today. And then what else? So between 2003 and now, we're seeing, again, advancements in reasoning. We just saw launches of new models just a couple of days ago. Multimodal capabilities. So when you hear that, it's beyond language. How do these companies bring in image, audio, video, combine them all together, and give us better insights? Trillions of parameters that we can now gain access to. There was some researchers have mentioned we actually think we're at a moment where we've exhausted the training of the internet. We're getting close, but the training of data that's behind the wall, so whether you're a company or an academic institution or just in private data that you never want to share, is not exhausted. And some of these companies are going to figure out how to use them. And so there's a lot of conversations around that as well. advanced safety training and alignment techniques in response to the advancement technologies, and then specialized models for coding and science and creative tasks. So what it means for us is we see AI assistants in our daily lives, whether it's because we bring it in, because we decide to choose to use them, or they're being pushed on us in all the platforms that we have. Lots of automated professional workflows, lots of companies figuring out whether you're manufacturing or agriculture or healthcare or state and local government, lots of folks figuring out how to bring that in. So we're seeing that, or at least experimenting how to bring it in. Educational AI tutoring has become more mainstream and also begs the question, what does it look like for us to teach in academia when there are these tutors, if you will, in quotes, that can help people learn. So in one sense, you democratize education. In the other sense, you now have less of a teacher in the room to unpack for you. The creative industry is being disruptive. We're still trying to figure out where that's going to land. And of course, regulatory discussions globally around frameworks and standards, which is, in my opinion, a good thing to have those discussions. The future. We're going to see AI assistant propagation. So AI assistants in different parts of our products and our lives in work and at home. Right now, today, there are a lot of conversations about connected multi-agent systems and their new agent protocols. What you'll hear is companies come up with MCP and A2A, and I don't know what other new agent protocols might come out in the next year, but basically what that means is the ability for one agent in one system to connect to another agent in one system and say, voila, I've connected your mail and your personal devices to your work stuff, and you can just ask one question and get what you need. And there are lots of questions to be asked when that's our norm. Lots of conversation about human AI collaboration. So what is the future of work? What is the future of our daily lives when we have devices that are in our homes that are powered by AI that can take some of the roles that we have, but do we want them to? Lots of specialization and personalization. So the ability to understand context of where we are and then produce a result based on that. And the last one actually for me is I find very exciting, but also with caution, new scientific discoveries, right? Like chemotherapy cocktails we never thought of before, molecules to combine that we never thought of before. And that's where the collaboration with people who really understand the risk and the potential for, let's say, scientific breakthroughs and medical breakthroughs is really important because obviously you don't want to come up with a new drug that seems like it's so exciting and it turns out to be quite harmful. So I'll leave you with the ecosystem of AI and how we all have a role. And then I'm really excited for this conversation. I mentioned in the beginning that we have industry, academia, government, venture, and advocacy. There's a lot more than this. We're humans, we span different disciplines and fields. But I wanted to break it up into this so we can really see all the forces at play. This has been the case since the beginning of time for technology. We've always had companies driving product development, creating new leadership roles. And right now we're seeing new chief AI officers, new chief responsible AI officer roles, et cetera, and new startups, right? Like that's always been a thing. It's like the more obvious, these are the people who build technology. But academia, higher ed is a big part of this. And I think where AI is different is unlike other disciplines, computer science and AI researchers um, move between industry and academia in like really porous ways that isn't as common for other disciplines where faculty members take long sabbaticals to be in industry or like the research is so closely tied to the product. It's different, and that's I think what quickly fuels some of the advancements that happens in industry and government. We often think about government as the place to set standards and enforce policy, right? It's also the place that historically had DARPA and the National Science Foundation that either funded or in-house built some of the technology that is the foundation for AI today. And government can still have an interesting role in that. I know we're at just a really interesting impasse right now. But historically, government has had a big role. And if you want, you can look up the history of Silicon Valley and just government's role in that in general. So government's role to enforce, set standards and policies, and fuel the building of technology as well. And of course, the world of funding. The funding for AI has exploded in the last few years. It's very disproportionate to who gets access to them. So there's a lot of work right now in thinking through, well, who gets to be the builders of technology, who are we leaving out, and who gets to build. And then the advocacy, practitioners, researchers, teachers, and so many who are pushing for ethics and responsibility, representation, the mitigation of bias, and so much more in our technologies. And we all have a role in that ecosystem, whether you are a user of the technology and you can advocate for yourself on if you want to use the technology. The caveat I have there is it should never be on the responsibility of the people using the system to have to understand if it's a safe system to use. But the reality is sometimes we just have to be our own advocates and our own agents when we think about should I bring this into my life? Or maybe you're in government and you're in industry and you're at a company or you are in academia or you're the power to fund new companies. We all have a role in this ecosystem, and it's more important that many disciplines across all these sectors come to play because again, computer science is one part of it, but we need the social scientists, the historians, the race and gender studies scholars, and the economists and the lawyers to help us really unpack where technology should go in our lives. Thank you. And so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Newman.
Thanks so much, Kathy. That was wonderful, not surprising. As usual, we just so grateful that you're able to join us and give this overview, very accessible sort of historical lens, and also anticipating the future. Kasha's going to kick off the Q&A.
Kathy, as always, amazing. Lots of good questions rolling in. Just a reminder to drop them in the Q&A tool and then to upvote them, do a little thumbs up if you agree with the question so that Newman and I can read them all and figure out which ones to ask Kathy based on your interest. I'm going to dive in with a question kind of wondering about the perspective of your presentation and maybe a lot of your work being based in the US, working among organizations that have access to technology that are financially
Yeah.
quite secure, and how your opinion or your thoughts would shift if we thought of this from a more global perspective, especially from when we think about folks or governments, countries, and populations that don't have access to the kinds of resources that are necessary to build and deploy and even use this AI.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest questions right now is how the global minority right now, which I live in, is shaping the technology and the narrative for the global majority that have much less access and much less tooling. And I think that's where it's hard to see some of the companies that pop up outside the US, like in Europe, in Asia, to have the ability to build some of these tools. We're also seeing, and I know there's lots of discussions on this, we're also seeing the discussions around different countries using some of the open models to build on their own as well. I do think there's a power movement we're in right now where the money and the politics of it makes it so that the Western world has a lot more access to building this. And I think when you're not in that power bubble, it's also still possible to find access to either open models to build in wherever region you're in. I know finding resources is also hard. I mean, part of building AI is having the infrastructure to do so. It's why people are leaning on some of the major cloud providers because having the infrastructure is really, really hard. And so I think part of it is just really reaching out to whatever resources you can find, whether it's open models, organizations that might have like leaning on infrastructure because you might not have it or be able to have that in the region that you're in. And I think all the regions continue to need to have their own like AI policies in place. So we're seeing lots of AI policies pop up around the globe as well, whether or not those countries are the ones that are the dominant players. They're also creating their own AI policies about how they use it. So you might be in a region where primarily you'll just be buying the technologies from other regions. That doesn't mean we don't impact how we buy and how we use it as well. We can still do that.
Great. So you're kind of covering, building AI for your own community or making sure that you use the power that you have as a purchaser of that AI to drive the product strategy of those companies.
Yeah.
You did mention openness a few times. I'm just wondering if you could break that down for us a little and explain what you mean by open and then, by extension closed, and maybe if you could help explain what the difference between those two things
Yeah.
are to this audience.
Yeah, well, open is so fraught now in the AI world because you have companies that have open in their name, and then they might not actually be open. And so when I say open in this sense, it's the built like technologies and tools that you can access without. I'll say without paying for it because usually when you're contributing something, you're giving away something in general. So openness in the sense that using technologies and models that you're able to access. in an open manner without needing to like hand over a check to pay for and use. And there are like I've had colleagues and folks in other regions of the world be able to I guess have a foot in the door that way.
We're going to switch gears a little bit. A question that came in from Yasmin. I'll just read it because it's very clear the way it's worded. We often hear that environmental concerns about AI will be mitigated as models become more efficient. But history shows that even as technologies improve, their overall environmental impact can still grow. As individuals, how should we think about AI's environmental footprint in this broader historical context? And what kinds of regulations or policy priorities should we be advocating for with our representatives? Thanks.
Yeah, I think a great one is to even just showing up at the table to write to your representatives about the environmental impact so that they're just even part of the dialogue at all. I think on a personal level, that one is hard. You have folks like even pre-AI, there are startups I've worked with who are like, when you do shopping online, we're gonna show you the footprint that you'll have if you buy X, Y, Z. And it turns out people say they want to know, and then they actually don't care because the trade-off of getting something really fast trumps whatever environmental impact it is. And I'm not saying that's like a doom, it's just like something that we've seen over time. There's like the tension of what we want, which is we care about the environment. Oh no, data centers sucking all the water out of regions. People literally can't find water to drink because a data center popped up because of AI. And usually those regions are regions that are less represented or like groups don't see are as valuable regions. And so one is if you do care to show up and make this part of the dialogue, I do think we do need regulation for where data centers can go, of how data centers are built and where and by whom and to what extent versus what we have now. Um, and so I don't know what it might look like today. I think there has to be involvement in the local, state, federal, international level. I know in general, when when the federal level isn't paying attention, state sometimes will also step in. We see this a lot with regulation. When I was at the Federal Trade Commission, we relied a lot on what states were doing as well to hold companies accountable. So look at all levels, your state level, maybe your local level, your federal level, if we still have to always push at the federal level. And then international levels. We see American companies build data centers around the world. And so there's a lot to look at there as well.
Great. And I'm gonna kind of jump off that one. These questions are they're extremely good. So keep them coming in, and they're far ranging. So Kathy, I hope you had your coffee today. So to kind of continue on with the question around regulation, there's a question here from an anonymous attendee about regulation and safety and trust frameworks. So some people say it can deter innovation to have safety and trust frameworks, but I wonder how the boundaries in regulation could actually help with innovation or creativity. So do you have any thoughts on this, the relationship between
Yes.
regulation, safety, trust, and creativity and innovation?
I love this question because I so firmly believe that when we have boundaries and barriers in some way, they oftentimes do feel innovation because when it's almost like if you have a full buffet and you're a glutton, you're just like, I need to spend as much money as I want. I can get as much data as I want. I can take that person's information over there, even though they didn't really mean it for it to be public, but like it is public, so who cares? And you don't have to think about any constraints, right? And sure, you might come up with some interesting ideas, but at some point you're going to hit barriers because you're like that person's like, oh, I never want you to share with you my data, and you're like, what are you doing? Or you're spending way too much money, and you have to reel it back, and it's like too late. You get yourself in technical debt. So there's that part to like having total freedom, and then actually ended up in a world where you didn't think through enough. But there's also the part where when someone's like, actually, you can only use X resources. You're only allowed, let's say, X amount of dollars to build your servers. And you're like, oh, well, everyone's been telling me that large language models are really resource intensive, and I can't do it with just like I'm making up numbers, 5 servers. And turns out when you're told you only have 5 servers, you might figure out how to do that, and you find ways to be incredibly efficient. We've seen that throughout history, right? Like the number of times when someone's like, well, you're not allowed to use X chemicals anymore. And you're like, well, we've always used this. This is like the only way we'll develop our product. Oh, but there's actually this other safer thing we never thought to use because we always use this. So there are so many examples we can draw on where having guardrails, and if you apply that to this AI moment today, you can think about things like, actually, this is an interesting juxtaposition where you think about consumer and enterprise. And consumer AI, it's let's go train on all of the data on the internet and go find everything we want. Um, and you might like have a couple of, I don't love the word hallucination, but I'll use it because it's common now. You might have hallucinations where, it makes up information because the internet's messy, or maybe it doesn't can't add two numbers because maybe everyone at some point like it trained on some data set where a bunch of kindergartners thought 2 + 2 was 8. And it gives you like the wrong answers. But when you're an enterprise, you have no luxury to do that. You're not allowed to bring all of your customer data into one giant place and just train on them and have a field day. Like it's just not you're not allowed to. It's not your business model. And suddenly you find really creative ways to do de-identification. You find really creative ways to mask information and train and give value while still respecting people's privacy. Um, and so I think about those moments a lot where how do you find creative ways to preserve the privacy and the security and the safety and mitigating bias because you have those constraints and you just have a better product overall.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, I love these questions. I'm actually having trouble. I love being a moderator, but I'm also having trouble deciding which to ask because there's so many good ones. Um, Here's one from David. As you know, you mentioned earlier on in your talk, as browsers and agents become an area of focus and an area of new tools, what short to medium term impacts do you anticipate?
As browsers and
Like
uh,
basically, as the AI agents are, start to get integrated, what short to medium term impacts do you anticipate? Like,
yeah.
this agent talking to this agent, or
Got it.
as you were saying, networking all
Oh,
your.
right. I remember. Yeah. So I was saying how back in the day, the internet made it possible to connect systems, and now we're in the moment where like Dave, when you mentioned browser, I also what popped in my head was too like the idea of computer use, and this is a tangent from your question, but the concept that what if an AI agent can just take over your browser and do stuff for you, and that's actually what people are thinking through right now. Like what are the mundane things you don't want to click through? It can like maybe I don't know, automatically book your whole family of five flight for you the moment summer starts, because it knows that you like to go to a certain place and it just automatically does it. Where I'm seeing with agents is the, the the most realistic thing I'm seeing with agents or organizations saying, what are like the mundane things, the note taking that doctors have to do, the end of year performance review where you probably had that conversation with your manager, or maybe you didn't, but like it's around, but it's like really annoying to pull all that information in and put it into one place. And in companies, they spend like months doing performance reviews. Um, or there are scenarios where let's use like financial records. Maybe there's like 80,000 contracts and documents, and you're trying to find one anomaly because someone messed up a purchasing order because they weren't supposed to buy something according to like a government policy and they did. Well, it's like a tedious task. And what I'm seeing is the advent of agents being able to connect systems. So maybe it's like your financial record system to like updated policies that are happening in real time, and then automatically either finding anomalies or automatically performing a task. And so I think some of that could be very exciting. And there are moments where you're like, well, what are some of the privacy concerns of connecting multi-agent systems together, even if you can? And then what's the agency you then take away from folks when you do that? And so now you might have financial folks who never understand how to detect what like a weird anomaly is, or you might have um, a student who might never learn how to write an essay because an agent can take, you know, an agent can like go into your system, upload, like find your new assignment, go and like find the three best essays on product requirement documents and metrics, update, like send it over to you, update it to your portal and submit it, and like you're done. So we're seeing lots of agentic systems, like ideas floating around for automating parts of our lives. And I think questions to ask are around with any connected system, what is the privacy, security concerns? And then is it an agency you want to give away? But that's it. I'll also plant the seed if you're like worried that interoperability is really hard, you all. There's a reason why healthcare organizations haven't been able to connect for a long time. A lot of multi-agent stuff requires the non-technology policy part of it to allow systems to connect to each other. So there's a lot to figure out there too.
Amazing. I am going to ask my last question for you, and then Newman's gonna finish us out. I'm gonna put 3 questions together. This is truly
All right.
so much fun to moderate and also so challenging. There seem to be several questions floating around about privacy and surveillance and digital rights, and what we can do as individuals or maybe as representatives of companies, organizations, maybe people who are procuring systems in schools. We've got a lot of different kinds of people on the call. But what can we be thinking about when it comes to ensuring our privacy, our digital rights, especially in an age of increased surveillance?
Yeah. One, I'm gonna fall back on that last slide I had where I'm like, it's gonna take all of you, I hope, are in all those sectors. And Sasha, I'll start with the individual, then I'll go to the macro. If any of you have followed the incredible Dr. Joy Buolamwini and her work, she'll go through airports, right? And are like, you know that sign that says you can opt out of like facial recognition? She's like, I'm going to do that. And just say no. And actually bring stuff with you to like even like obscure faces and things like that, right? And actually, she and Dr. Sasha Cassandra Chalk here in Boston did like a whole incredible event at the Boston Public Library where they brought in young kids to show them how they can trick AI systems just by putting on different attires. I think on like a personal level, if you're in the position to understand these tools enough, like how many times do you go through the airport and actually think twice versus just I need to get to my flight, right? But if you have the agency and power and understanding and time to do any of this, there's that part of it. There's ways to raise issues, decide for yourself you don't want to use it. And that's just like these personal decisions we make every day. I think on a broad level with government, it comes back to um, policy making and enforcement. Whether it's like the Federal Trade Commission that is there to protect the consumer against harms that customer or companies have, whether it's like Congress, other places making policies. I understand that's complicated given the roving leadership in government, but I think even looking at the state level, right now states are making lots of decisions about what's allowed and what's not allowed. So maybe you go to the state level, and if you're international, work with your various states, various countries and towns to come up with that. So I think there should be some level of decision making at the government level wherever you live in the world. Same with companies. If you work in a company, ask those questions. Say, you know what, we could do this, but maybe we shouldn't. And I know that's also hard because the forces tend to be pulling you the other way, like which is we can, so we will. And same with venture. Like if you're in venture, and I've done this in different ways, you have the power to decide what to fund and what not to fund. And when you fund something, you have the power via your term sheets or your criteria or your check-ins to be like, hey, here's like unmasking AI, go read it, and then go have a conversation about how you think about surveillance in your company. So I think we all have a different role. And I think stepping up to take action, whether it's like the actual decision in our products, if you're in a company, like the actual pen to paper of writing policies or doing actual enforcement when companies violate that, determining where money goes, advocating. Some of us are in advocacy, whether it's academia or policy or advocacy organizations, or just on a personal level, like step up and raise awareness for like, hey, that's a violation of my privacy. I don't want that. And it might seem like a small thing, but sometimes when enough people point that out, it can change the whole direction. Like Dr. Joy made it so companies completely changed the directions of what they were doing with the surveillance technology. So sometimes things seem big, but sometimes a small group of advocates can also get companies to change.
Amazing. Well, that is a great note to end on, but I am going to ask one final question,
Okay.
which is the same question I asked to Arvind at
Oh
the end.
gosh. I was thinking about that when you asked. I was like, oh no, what's the answer?
So I'll just repeat it for those folks who weren't at the last talk. If you had the ability to transmit information to the broadest imaginable audience, one particular thing about AI that you would like to get into the heads of, people today, what message might
Yeah.
you share?
I'm going to make it about the individual. I thought about making it about the people who build technologies, but I'm going to make it about the individual in that AI agents are becoming more popular. So you'll hear a lot about agents. So even if they're not called agents, they're these tools that take away something and usually veiled under the pretense of helping us. And to really hold tight to what keeps us human. And the example I'll use is sometimes you might always have a map at your disposal, but sometimes you just might want to be like, I want to wander a city because I might stumble upon something I never otherwise would know because some person or some team that was developing the algorithm determined that this was the best path, and you've like missed the amazing view, or like some restaurant that like was never on the technology radar. And so we're going to see increasing uses, right? Like helping you write your essays, plan your trips. And even if it feels easier, it's like drawing back on just because you can get help, do you want it? And sometimes that help isn't like think of the lesson someone helped you, but you're like, okay, that help just wasn't it. Like I didn't, that wasn't really the kind of help I wanted. AI can very much get into that cycle with us. It's maybe not it takes something away from us. So my broadcast to the masses is more from the user of the system, even though I tend to be on the builder side of, if you can't think about what agency you want to hold on to, even when the help is so appealing and the ease is so appealing and it's like already there, because that's what companies do. They seep into our lives. Hold tightly to what makes us human and be with each other.
Amazing. That was a terrific answer, Kathy. So I'm so glad I asked it. And again, you won't be able to hear the clapping, but I do encourage everybody out there to give some applause for Kathy. Thank you so much for this, both for the Q&A and also everything you presented.